Hi everyone. Hi, welcome to Penang Institute. Good afternoon. We're very happy today to start off what is going to be a project that will go on at least until the next elections, which is we will be discussing federalism and what to do about it. Right. So today is the kicking off session, really, and we are very happy to have certain very important speakers here with us. Now, let me start by giving some opening remarks on the subject and how Penang and Penang Institute holds themselves to the subject itself. Now, political tides rise and fall, and so does the policy focus over time. But for Penang Institute, one issue has always been relevant. Sometimes it comes to the fore, sometimes it waits on the sidelines. This is, of course, the issue of Malaysian federalism. What is this animal and how can we tame it for efficacy and efficiency? Does it serve Penang and in what way? In June 2022, 3 years ago now, Penang Institute published something called the Enabling Decentralisation and Improving Federal-State Relations in the Federation of Malaysia. This was a report prepared under the purview of YB Gooi Hsiao Leung here today, working together with Professor Francis Loh and myself and Penang Institute. Francis isn't here, is he? Is he? No. In recent weeks, YB Gooi and YB Lee Kai Lun, who is here today as well, two of our most active backbenchers in the State Assembly, pushed for a revival of this important issue, and the State-Federal Relations Select Committee was formed. The seminar today is to begin the discussion on how Penang, given the present political situation at the state and the federal level, can lead in making federalism the effective system that it was meant to be. How can federal power collaborate with state power to drive the development of Malaysian nation building and empower not only Penang, but all other subnational entities as well? We have with us on stage today, as mentioned, YB Gooi Hsiao Leung, and we have with us Professor Wong Chin Huat, who's not only a very old friend of the Institute, but he used to work here many, many years, running the political science department. He's now with Sunway University. YB Gooi is a lawyer and ADUN for Bukit Tengah, and formerly MP for Alostar, and is, of course, the chairman of the Select Committee on Federal-State Relations. Professor Wong is an alumnus of Penang Institute, as I mentioned. You see his articles a lot in the media. He is now the political scientist at Sunway University and works on parliamentary democracy, electoral systems, and of course, federalism. Welcome home, Chin Huat. Let me now hand the floor over to YB Gooi to begin the discussion. Professor Wong will continue with his take on how we can empower Penang. We then end with a public discussion on the issue, just to pick the brains of those present here today on this very important issue. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Dato' Ooi, for the opening remarks. I would like to first start off really by thanking Penang Institute under the leadership of Dato' Wee Kee Beng and also YB Kai Lun for really organizing today's event. It is basically going to be hopefully the beginning of a series of public engagement that we will be organizing to really talk about, as Dr. Wee has said, federalism and also how we can ask for greater autonomy for Penang. I think this is a really interesting issue which is close to everyone's hearts in Penang. And I think that this is the most opportune time for us to move ahead in really advocating for greater powers and greater funds for Penang. Also, of course, I would like to thank Professor Wong Chin Huat. He needs no introduction, political scientist, and writes so much about all the political happenings in Malaysia and also reforms and etc. that Dato' Wee has mentioned. I also see here today we have YB Gooi Hsiao, who is also ADUN of Komta, and he is also a member of our select committee. Stuart, thank you for coming from from Penang Think City. And most of all, thank you everyone for taking your afternoon out and coming today to listen to this conversation. I think this conversation is very important because basically it relates to the future of Penang and what it means to have a certain right and means for us to be able to determine our destiny in how we want to be governed in Penang and how we want to develop in Penang. I would just, for simple, for a start, perhaps just go through what I think or what we all know are the key important elements of a model federal country or system. Well, as you know, Malaysia is supposed to be a federation, but in reality, we are more like a unitary state, right? We have a very highly centralized system in Malaysia, whereby basically the federal government controls most of the aspects of governance, everyday running of the state, in fact, even I would say to some extent, and also funding, right? But before I go into that, let me just say, usually I'm better at coming up and giving impromptu charamas or political speeches, but when it comes to forums where I'm faced with academics like Professor Wong, I made some rough notes and I hope I can refer it and apologize if I don't get it right, Professor Wong. So yeah, so as I was saying, I would like to start off by saying that Penang is a very small state. In fact, the second smallest state in the whole of Malaysia after Perlis. We are 800 square kilometers, very small. But even though we are a very small state, we punch very heavy and we contribute in a very big way to the development and economy of Malaysia. However, because of our over-centralized system and also the current fiscal arrangement, our hands are tied. And that leaves us shortchanged. We, as a state, have a huge potential to develop beyond its current position, and we are actually ready. I think we have, in terms of human capital, the people that are, highly educated, highly trained, academics, intellectuals, businessmen, successful businesses. There's a lot that we can do, but the problem is too many decisions about Penang are made far away in Putrajaya. Now, of course, to have a good federal system, we have to have three key ingredients. We need clear division of powers so that we know who is responsible for what. We need financial autonomy so that states have enough funds to carry out their job. And also, importantly, we need cooperation and not control. And what I mean here is over 5 decades or 6 decades of Malaysian rule under the former federal government, what has happened is basically a lot of states, because they have been so strangled in terms of what little powers that they have, and the federal controlling most of aspects of governance. And what we have is basically a lot of states becoming really not a partner in the federation, but a mere, how do I say, agent pelaksana, an agency, right? A government agency that only implements, but does not have the right or the powers to decide on policies that affects Penang. Now, I want to perhaps give you an example, right? When we talk about the system, and I was saying just now how the federal constitution gives Putrajaya control over the most important areas. I'm talking here about education, transport, healthcare, policing, housing, and even rubbish collection and sewerage. In fact, the Penang state government is now having discussions with the federal government on federal government taking over the management of rubbish collection and sewerage in Penang. States, on the other hand, are left with a very small list. We have basically jurisdiction over land, forestry, local government, and religion, or rather Islamic affairs. And this can all be found in the 9th schedule of our constitution. There's 3 lists there. A federal list, which basically lists out all the powers of the federal government. A state list, which lists out the responsibilities and powers of the state government. And then we have a concurrent list, which is basically a joint responsibility. Now, for us, one of the biggest problem here is that, as I've said just now, most countries, states manage their own public transport, their own police, their own education policies. And talking about police, I remember Dato' not only we of course, police comes under the federal control, but after Pakatan Harapan came into power, and the Penang state government wanted to form a PPS, a voluntary service for what we call a community safety, a bit like Rukun Tetangga, where they go around taman-tamans, you know, to with the community, organized by the community to look after security. That was actually struck down by the federal government at that time. So we could not even set up something as simple as that. And I don't know if a lot of you know, even when you talk about transportation, when you take catch a bus in Penang, right? The entire bus network comes under Rapid. Of course, we call Rapid Penang, but actually it's controlled, administered, decisions are made far away in Putrajaya, and really the state government, to your surprise maybe, they don't even have the power to decide on where they can put a bus stop in Penang. They have to get a discussion going and approval from Putrajaya. Now, the biggest problem, I think, of course, is money. If you want to run Penang well, really you need to have sufficient resources and funds to run the state. States like Penang collect very little revenue ourselves. Most taxes, income tax, company tax, GST, excise, go to the federal government. Then Putrajaya decides how much they want to give back. We literally have almost no say in how this money, the wealth that has been created in Penang, we have no say in how it should be used. I want to give you an example. Penang contributes about 7 to 8 billion ringgit in federal taxes a year. Do you know how much we get back in return from the federal government? Of course, there are infrastructure projects and funding and things like that. Those are for specific projects that they want to build, but money coming back to the state government. Basically, under our constitution, there are only 2 express provisions for as far as what federal is mandated to give to the states. One is capitation grant, which is they go by number of population per head, and the other one is road maintenance grant. For capitation grant, which has not been looked at for the longest time, we get about 25 million ringgit a year. That works out to about 16 ringgit per head. And maybe if you like char kway teow, you can buy 2 plates of char kway teow in Penang, right? But in terms of how much we contribute, 7 to 8 billion, and how much we get back, I think that is a very, it's an amount that is, I think it's just totally out of order. And also, let me try and give you some other examples. Penang, of course, you know, we contribute very big to the economy. GDP per year is about 100 over billion. I think last year was about 120 over billion. So we contribute quite sizable. We are the biggest exporter of goods for Malaysia, in fact. And more than half of the, and we produce more than half and export more than half of semiconductor products, industry, manufacturing, chips. That all comes from Penang, right? But you know what? Even though we contribute so much, as I was saying, but really what we get back in terms of actual revenue, like what the state actually earns, ladies and gentlemen, is actually very palpable. The state makes about 600 million a year. As I mentioned just now, that is from things like quit rent, you pay your assessment, house assessment rates. The state government gets some money from land premiums, but that's it. We are not rich like other states, like for example, Sabah, Sarawak, where they are rich in natural resources, oil, forestry. So the Penang state government does not generate any of that income. So our revenue per year, just by state, because everything else is controlled by the federal, on average is about 600 million a year. 600 million a year, compared to Selangor is about 4 to 5 billion a year. And if you want to compare to Sabah and Sarawak, we're talking in the tens of billions. So that is how stark the difference is. In terms of revenue, we are, even though Penang is economically doing very well, we are very advanced, very far ahead, but we, in terms of generating state income, we are the fourth lowest in the country. We are just in front of Perlis, Negeri Sembilan, and Malacca. That is the quite sad part of it. Now, coming back, I just wanted to sort of, at least so that you have an idea of the constraints that Penang is having. And as a result, really, Penang is one of the states that have been having consecutively state budget deficit for the last 13 years. 13 years. Our state reserve consolidated funds had reduced from 2002, oh no, is it 202, 2 billion at that time. And it has gone down to 100 million, 155 million at the end of last year. So much so that the state government had to go and advance 100 million from the federal government to make sure they could tie over for this year. That is, so actually when a lot of people think that Penang is rich, in actual fact, and we all always like to joke, the people of Penang is rich, but the state government is very poor. And that is one of the biggest problems that we are facing. And for your information, whenever we are in the DUN, which is the state legislature assembly meetings, and we often, as YBs, we would stand up, we would ask questions about development in our constituencies, about Penang in general, about roads, when is it going to get fixed up and developed, etc., etc. And the answer is always the same. They are waiting for the federal government to get funds to fix the roads, drains, build schools, build and solve flooding problems, which we call rancangan tebatan banjir, right? So flooding issues, etc., etc. That is always the case, and that is why we have heard so many times that not so many times, well, actually quite many times, our chief minister making the repeated calls that there should be a fairer distribution of taxes that we as Penang state pay to the federal government, and for the share of that to come back to us. So the state government and Chief Minister Chow has many times on occasion said they should at least give us back 20% of what they collect from the from Penang, which is about 7 to 8 billion a year. There are also other views, including myself, which I have also advocated before. We should look at SST, consumption tax, because these are taxes that are collected from economic activities that are generated from the state. So they should give us back. The federal government collects about 40 to 50 billion a year from SST right now. And in my estimate, if the federal government were to, for example, give back 1% of our state's GDP contribution to the federal government, which is 1 billion, which is 100 billion, we will get 1 billion. And that would save a lot of our problems in the state, actually. So, I mean, these are financial constraints that the state is having. As I said, there are a lot of other issues concerning administration. We don't have the right to decide on hospitals. We complain a lot about, the hospital staffing, waiting time, not enough specialists. But these are all decided by the federal government. Education, for example, right? We know that each state has their own different needs and their own different areas that they want to concentrate on. Penang, it would be semiconductor manufacturing, right? And there is a real serious shortage of skilled workers in Penang. So we are very much into STEM. We want to train more engineers, but we have no say in whatsoever on developing curriculums that can specifically address those needs. So these are real problems, and I feel that in the long run, it is not sustainable if we carry on like this. And that is why I'm thankful that YB Gooi Hsiao Leung, my colleague, in the last session of the State Assembly meeting, he had proposed and tabled a motion for us to re-establish this select committee on federal-state relations. And the whole idea of having this select committee is for us to advocate for greater autonomy and for more funds to come down to Penang. It is the first select committee in the country of such nature, and it's a bipartisan committee in which it is represented by both the government backbenchers as well as the opposition. And I think what we really need is now a formal way, right, in which we can officially demand, ask for greater autonomy and greater funds to come down to Penang. And I think some of the things that we want to do, ladies and gentlemen, that we want to concentrate on is, of course, first of all, is we want to organize more of these series of conversation, because I think to a lot of maybe general public, they don't understand what decentralization is. They don't understand the difference between the distinction between federal and state powers. And so really, I mean, maybe it's not politically sexy, but I think it is so important to the development of Penang. And so we will be organizing more series of conversation to bring awareness. That's number one. Number two, equally important, I think what we hope to achieve is we want to start collaborating with other states. And this is not something that has been done enough. I think we need to have more interstate cooperation between the states, because I think many states are also facing this problem in which they are starved of funding to carry out and deliver basic public services. We have seen before this, even now present king and formerly the Sultan of Johor, just I think 2 years ago, before he was elevated to being the king, he had threatened actually to say that, Johor, if you federal government do not treat us fairly, we're prepared to pull out of Malaysia. That's what he said. It was a stark warning given then. And recently the Crown Prince again issued a statement to ask for at least 20 to 30% of a portion of the taxes collected from Johor to be returned to Johor. And I think this problem is not just faced by Penang, it's Johor and many other states involved. So we hope to have, to organize very soon a symposium of an interstate cooperation between the states in which we can work on common interests that affects all our states, and especially our relationship with the federal government. And the last thing that we are hoping to advocate is for the national government, the federal government, to form a federal state relations commission that will look into all the working arrangements and how we can reform the current present system to make it more fair and more just for the states in Penang. I was just talking to Professor Wong earlier, having a cake with him and cheesecake over coffee. And he was mentioning how, and I totally agree, and I think he will elaborate it, hopefully he'll elaborate more of it in his speech later, is that federalism and asking for greater autonomy is an issue that affects all the different states. And we shouldn't take it for granted that, you know, after the next general election, it will be the same government, it could be a different government that may, you know, not be favorable to different states. So really, it should be non-partisan, it should be cross-partisan, so to speak, right? And that we should be looking at this because issue in which all states should benefit. And I totally agree with him that we should start working now. And why not now? Why wait later? Why is this the best time? We already have a friendly government. We already have the same government, I mean, so to speak, a friendly government, the state and federal. And if we don't initiate and call for reforms now, how much longer are we going to wait? You know, I can go on and on, but I think, yeah, this is a problem with politicians. They get the mic and then they forget themselves. But maybe we'll leave the rest for later. And now we'll hear the bigger picture and the more interesting stuff from Professor Wong on decentralization and what we can do to empower Penang. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, YB Gooi. That was a great introduction to the subject, I think. So you sort of see the breadth of the problem that we are facing and why we're even organizing this. The next speaker, of course, will be Chin Huat. Now, before I get him up on stage, I would like to say that when he left 2019, was it? 2019, when he left Penang Institute for greener pastures, as he thought, he was quite sorry about that, having to leave Penang Institute after being here so long. But I told him to think of it the other way around, that we are sending him out. We are expanding, so he can front the Penang agenda in Kuala Lumpur at Sunway. So today he's back for his debriefing, as you were. So Chin Huat, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. It's afternoon and you were all here. Very humble. Of course, it's a YB Gooi's attraction. And as Kibing say, this is homecoming. Coming back to Penang Institute to Penang is feel like going back to your maiden home. I spent nearly 7 years here. Now, YB Gooi has made the case for decentralization. I think most of us know why we need that. I'm not going into that. And my slides would be probably just 8 after this. I want to keep it simple because I think what shorter, because what is important is to have that conversation. It's not about what we need. It's not about whether we should do it or not, but it's how do we get it done? How do we get it started? I think the questions of should we need this or not is a foregone conclusions. That's a consensus in many states. It's how do we get from here? Next, please. So I would spend a bit of time looking back, doing a bit of comparison, and then look back and say why we are here, where we are, and how do we get from here to a better state. Before that, okay, this is a comparison in terms of competence of Australia, Malaysia, Germany. These three, thank you. These three are federations, And then you have two unitary states, Indonesia and UK. Now, I'm sure if you're interested, then later we can share with you the PDF. But what I want you to see here is that you look at, for example, I put here education, healthcare, police, transportation, natural resources on land, local government, religious affairs, and so on. Let's take education and healthcare. These are the things that people talk a lot. Malaysia is the only one that you have the national government solely controlling this, of my comparison. In Australia, it's state. In Germany, it's state. In Indonesia, it's national, provincial, and local. And UK, if you go to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, it's their regional government. Now, if you look at healthcare, in Australia, it's concurrent. Germany and Malaysia both are federal. Indonesia is concurrent. In UK, it's their regional government. You look at police, Australia, it would be federal and state. Germany is federal and state. Indonesia and Malaysia are national. And UK, again, is regional government if you are outside of England. What I want to put into context here is that in NIM, we are a federation. But we are actually much more centralized than unitary states around us. Indonesia is definitely more decentralized than we are. So the question is why? The reason is because our history. The reason why, okay, federalism started in 1895, right? Keeping is my historian guru, so I have to check, correct? I think it's 1895 when you had the federated Malay states. But what we had after the return of the British was a very brief, less than 2 years of Malayan Union. That was a unitary state. The successful opposition to that led to two very important developments: the foundations of UMNO as a driving force in Malaysia up to 2018, and also the birth of Federation of Malaya. Unlike many federations that were built because you want to accommodate differences, federalism was chosen in 1948 as the opposite alternative to Malayan Union, which would turn the entire British Malaya into a full colony, but also more importantly, for many Malays, is the liberal citizenship scheme for non-Malays. So because that the Malayan Union, actually, the objection to Malayan Union and the adoptions of re-adoptions of federalism was so influenced by Malay nationalism, we had a very centralized federal state arrangement. Now that was inherited in 1963 when Malaya dissolved itself. Now, if you go to East Malaysia, they will tell you Sabah and Sarawak did not join Malaysia. Sabah and Sarawak formed Malaysia together with Malayan and Singapore. That's completely correct. But also I want to stress one point that is very important to state here. When Malaysia was formed, Malaya was dissolved. Malaya dissolved itself so that the 11 states were freed up to be federated with Singapore, Sabah, and Sarawak to form Malaysia. So while we had this expansion process, we did not change the fundamental design of a system, partly because it's very rushed. And I wouldn't go into that for very long, but it's a combination of two C at work. One C is communalism, the other C is Cold War. So we got what we had. And after Singapore left, we basically the same thing. In other words, what we got was actually a 1948 model. In 1963, it was just merely modified a bit. Why I want to emphasize this point is because if you're going to make any changes, we eventually need a national conversation. This is why this conversation is important, because from here we're going to take it further. Penang Institute prides itself, aims to make ideas work. I hope this conversation can go further. Penang is the first state that introduced local election in 1951. But for this to happen, we need Sabah and Sarawak to take the lead. So I hope that we do have friends over there listening to this, and we can take it further. And thank you very much that I want to express my highest respect to Hsiao Leung and Kai Lun for pushing for a special select committees on federal state election. All other states should follow. And hope that soon we'll see a summit, maybe in Penang, with Sabah and Sarawak not taking the lead of the premiers, the chief ministers together discussing about a common state agenda. Now, I want to go further from here. What we have is an asymmetric federation, meaning that the states have different power. And I put here, this was the original setting. Just now, Hsiao Leung mentioned about federal list, state list, and concurrent list. These are the important power. Now you could see the earlier part here, everyone shared the same thing because that's the 1957 structure, what we had. And then what you have in Sabah and Sarawak and Singapore, these are addition because in 1963, we didn't change the constitution. We just basically add on appendixes to that. But it's important to compare what you have. For all the states, it's Islam, land, local government. That's very basic. In Sabah and Sarawak, you have native law. You don't have that in Singapore. And in Sabah, you have until 1970, medicine and health. No, now no more. But you look at Singapore. Singapore control education, medicine and health, and labor. Now, this is concurrent power. Power shared by the federal and the states. Town planning, social welfare, public health, that's basically to control transmissible disease and so on. This part is common. In Sabah and Sarawak and Singapore, both have personal law. Singapore has something extra, state borrowing, meaning Singapore could borrow money with lesser federal constraint. Now, question here is that, how did Singapore get this good deal as compared to Sabah and Sarawak? And this is the point I've been stressing over there in Sabah and Sarawak. Singapore tricks was less is more. It's not entirely something they wanted. It's what Tengku wanted. Tengku doesn't want a Singapore that is too assertive that could threaten his power. So Tengku made it very clear because it was Singapore who wanted to marry Malaya. And Tengku was like, nah, this is a difficult partner. And then they turned to UK and say, if you want me to marry your daughter, you give me another 3 daughters as well. But Brunei stay out, so you end up having the other to come in, and then Singapore left. Right? That's how the history worked. But the original arrangement was to underrepresent Singapore. The orange bar show you the percentage of the population in 1961. This is from British historical document. You could see that Singapore had more population than Sabah and Sarawak add together. The yellow bar show you the percentage of parliamentary seats. You can see that both Sabah and Sarawak had more representation than Singapore. Basically, Singapore get a very raw deal because Malaya did not want Singapore to be too strong. That's the reason why Singapore got kicked out. And just how many days ago? Today is 13. So 5 days ago was our divorce anniversary. And our ex became the richest in the world, right? Okay. Now, but look at this bar line, show you the percentage of whether it's over or under representation. If it's exactly equal representation, it's 1.0. So you could see Malaya was underrepresented a little bit. Singapore was terribly underrepresented, 0.57. They got 57% of their rightful share. And that went to Sabah and Sarawak. On surface, Sabah and Sarawak got a good deal, right? But if you go back here, you can see Sabah and Sarawak did not get education, did not get medicine and health, did not get labor. They get over-representation in parliament. But their parliamentarians voted against their state interests twice in 1966 and 1976. I'm not going to the detail, you could find all those things. The point that I want to make here is that how do we go from here? Now, just now, YB Gooi mentions that our chief minister talked about the call for more money coming in. He was the not only one. Here you have the Johor region, and here you have Sabah, Sarawak, Kelantan. I think this is Kelantan. Yeah, everyone wanted something. Everyone has been making those calls. But no one has basically got much. Sabah and Sarawak got a bit. But you go there, they will always tell you and say, always negotiation. One committee after another committee. And we are just getting this little. Why? Very simple reason. It doesn't pay off for any prime minister to concede to the demand of decentralization. Because every state wanted something for themselves, right? What happened if the prime minister say, okay, since you asked this from me, I give it to you. Whether that's Sabah, Sarawak, PH states like Penang or Selangor, or BN state like Johor, or past states like Kelantan, Terengganu, whatever concession that any prime minister, not just Anwar Ibrahim, makes to any of these states, everyone else would come, right? And they would be seeing like, if you not give it to me, then you are selling my interest to benefit the state. So if it's Sabah and Sarawak, then you'll be selling out Semenanjung. It's Penang, you're selling out Malay because this is a bloody Chinese-dominated DAP state. We all know the story, how it goes. So you get stuck. The question here is, how do we get from here? I would say, it has almost come to the second last slide of my talk. Because what I want is actually a conversation. I think what I hope to see is this bold conversation. Sabah and Sarawak has been talking a lot, but they're talking decentralization from their own state interests. They basically they don't care what happened here. So that's why I call this a bold conversation, because there's a potential for this conversation to really get national. To get national is no way to belittle Sabah and Sarawak, but it's actually make their demands more likely to be fulfilled. I suggest that we don't just go for MA 63, the Malaysia Agreement 1963. We need to go for MA 63 plus. What does it mean? It means that we should look at MA 63 as the floor, not the ceiling. That's what our founding fathers, parents have agreed. In 1963, or the functional equivalents to achieve those noble goals should be the basic things that we have. But we should go further. Why? You have looked at that. Just now, the comparison of states and concurrent powers. If we stick to MA 63, Sabah and Sarawak should not get education. They should not get control on healthcare. This is what they wanted. They're getting it, but purely administratively. Sarawak is running their own international school, their university. They get to retain examinations for primary schools and secondary school and use English and so on. Nothing with a constitutional basis. It's all administrative concession, meaning that you have a different government coming in, you have a different minister coming in that can be difficult to you and want to roll back everything you have. Of course, they wouldn't really actually roll back. They will use that to extract political benefits, to extract concession from you. So we have to think, in that sense, MA 63, if you want what people are talking about now, MA 63 is insufficient. You have to demand for MA 63 plus. And why this doesn't go far enough? Because as I mentioned, anything that the federal government make in concession to one party doesn't help the federal government. Because everyone else who have not got the same thing would complain that they're being shortchanged. So why would the federal government bother to concede to individual demands? The only solution is for all the states to gang up and say, we negotiate among ourselves, this is what we want. And then you basically have to work on one simple demand and make adjustment to that. That makes it much more possible. No politicians want to invite trouble by showing that they are so nice and so gentle, and everyone come and ask me for something. And what should we put into MA63? That we need to have an IGC 2.0. Okay, IGC is Intergovernmental Committee. That was the committee consisting of the UK government, Malaya government, and the Sabah and Sarawak government, which was controlled by the UK at the time, to negotiate what was the deal for Sabah and Sarawak. That's where you have most of the things on Sabah and Sarawak in MA63 stemmed from. Singapore has its own deal. And people are, in Sabah and Sarawak, they like to talk about tripartites and so on. Why? Because they assume that the Malaya, the Federation of Malaya still exists today, after 1963. So then the federal government can represent them. No. Federation of Malaya was dissolved immediately when Malaysia was formed. You cannot expect the national government to represent them. They have their own legislature. 9 out of the 11 states have their own rulers who sit in the Conference of Rulers with their formal and actual power. You have to get their buy-in before you want any real changes. So this is the situation we are in. We need to have an Intergovernmental Committee 2.0. The formula is not 3. The formula should be 1 + 2 + 11. Now, why don't I say 1 + 13? Because that gives this feeling that, say, all the 13 states are the same. No, they're not. We are an asymmetric federation, and that should be made open and clear. So what we here should do is to actually have, just now, as Hsiao Leung mentioned, we should have a cross-party, cross-state consensus of what we need. Then only you can push it through. And why this is necessary for all the parties? As he has said very profoundly, no one knows which government will be in power. It's in the interest of every state government to protect your own turf. You don't do so, you're basically counting on your good luck that the next government will be on your side. What if it is not? For Penang, what if it's a PAS-dominated government? For PAS, what if it's continuing to be a PH or UMNO-dominated government? So it's in interest of all the state to put aside your partisan thing, just agree on something. There's a lot of things everyone wants extra. You don't have to agree on that, but you can start with something everyone would agree. Maybe not 20% from your revenue. It could be 10% whatsoever, something everyone agree and leave enough room for everyone to demand something else. But what you need is a framework that get into this, that's not control. Okay. I try to control myself in 20 minutes, so you know that I feel. Okay, but this is almost a second end slide, so I should finish it within 25 minutes. So it's basically what you need to protect yourself. We are talking about reform, not out of some noble idea. This is self-interest, enlightened self-interest. It's about how to rationalize the division of power in our federal system so we get a better deal. In this current situation, don't expect to get local government election. You know why? Penang is a good example to show you why. If you have 2 local elected government, the mayor would be more important than the chief minister. Right? Would any chief minister actively want themselves to be less important? No. That's a fact. There's a simple solution in other countries. You can basically split Penang into 2, make them 2 states. You can split Malacca as well. Malacca and Outer Malacca, but you can't do on all the sultanates because the sultan doesn't want their state to be split. So we cannot actually rationalize to have a very lean 2-tier system. They have to remain 3 tiers. And the current way to keep this 3-tier system is to make your local government depending on the state government so the state remain relevant. What we should have is for power to be devolved from state to federal to the state, and then from the state to the local government. That brings me to the last point. This radical rethink here, what we should think about MA63 is the floor, not the ceiling, of how federalism should be. And we should formally recognize Sabah and Sarawak as regions, special regions different from our states. This is important because people talk about like the constitutional amendment in 2022 that the amended Article 1, Clause 2 of the Federal Constitution, they say that recognize Sabah and Sarawak as region. No. You go and look at it, it just merely say that Sabah and Sarawak are Borneo states. You can call your head of government as premier, but it doesn't change anything. What we should do is formally recognize it, give Sabah and Sarawak the assurance they are different from us. When we talk about decentralization, when we say everyone get more, they always get more than us. So when we talk about a national decentralization agenda, that's one that is inclusive of the Malayan state. We are not talking about making Sabah and Sarawak bringing down to our level. We are talking about recognizing the real situation. So the IGC 2.0, the one I mentioned, they should negotiate constitutional amendment to the 9th schedule and on fiscal decentralization, fiscal federalism. All those things have to come together. I mean, you cannot actually, everyone takes money from the federal government until the federal state is so poor that they cannot do anything. That won't work. So we actually need a very honest discussion and not one that say, if my party is in government, that's the time I'm going to get what I want. I don't care about my neighbor. We are too small to be petty. And I would argue for an elected and empowered Senate with veto power for Sabah and Sarawak, so to make them feel very secure. I oppose completely for them to have 35% in the Dewan Negara, because that would cause immense inequality in our voting right. It would lead to political instability. If Sabah and Sarawak with 17% of electorate control 35% of parliamentarian, they can form a simple government with another 16% of parliamentarians from here. That kind of government wouldn't survive. I know some people wouldn't mind that they wouldn't survive because in chaos, new country can be built. But for me, if you want, that's what you want, tell us. To elevate fear of this secessionism, separatism, I think that decentralization should also happen in Sabah and Sarawak. So you would end up having another Tun Mustafa Harun, who wanted to be Sultan of Sabah. Basically, you can't have one single strongman. You're going to have one strongman at the state level, then you're going to maybe have another 10 strongmen at the divisional or residency level. It would be very, very hard for you to get everyone agree to go for independence. That's the Indonesian strategy after 1998. They decentralized, but the power did not stop at the provinces. They go down to their residency, their kabupaten. So you get the decentralization you want, but you avoid creating monster. And for West Malaysia, we should talk about gradual introductions of local elections. So, okay, slightly more than 25 minutes, but thank you.
Thank you, Chin Huat. Okay, we'll speakers up on the floor, and then we can have either a discussion between them or between them and the floor. Yeah, start that. Three. Yeah, I'm sure it's a subject that touches everybody's heart, or all the issues that have been mentioned, I'm sure would touch on issues that all of you have been thinking about, whoever has lived in Malaysia a sufficient length of time. These are all issues that I think do hit people after they've lived a while in Malaysia. The inherent unfairness, if you like, in how the federation has developed. And I think it's a good point you made, Chin Huat, that one should also always remember 48, right? 1948, as it were. In some ways, there's something about 1948 that I like to discuss that has to do with federation and so on. In many ways, I thought the Federation of Malaya 1948 could just as easily have been called the Federation of Sultans or Sultanates, right? It was an agreement that was agreed to between the British, the Sultans, and UMNO, and nobody else, just the three of them. And UMNO, of course, could be seen as the representative of the Muntri class in Malayan or Malay governance, as it were. Anyway, in a way, if that was the strong pillar for how Malaysia later developed, then everything else seemed to be tweaks to this very strong pillar that consisted of UMNO, meaning the Mantri class, and the sultans. Now, is that too dark a picture to paint of how Malaysia was formed? That it was too one-sided to start with?
I think bygone is bygone. What we want to do is look at it now. I'm one of the very few Malaysians who get very excited when politics gets so chaotic. I know most people feel very distressed, thinking that you change the government so frequently. I always see it very positively because I grew up at a time when you talk about changing government, elections come. You go to supermarket and you find instant noodles were all gone because people were so worried that you have a riot. But from 2018 to 2022, we have 5 prime minister in that 5 years, from Najib to Anwar. And we almost catch up with Japan in the speed of changing prime minister. It's a good thing because we take it much more easier. For me, I think now is the best time because that before things get settled down, this is a time that where you can actually demand for reform. Ultimately, you can think about political behavior in 2 ways. Either you buy insurance or you buy lottery. What's the difference? You buy lottery because you think your luck is good, right? You don't buy lottery because you think that I want to donate money to the lottery company. You don't do that. You buy insurance because you accept the fact that there could be rainy time in your life. Reform is basically make the system fairer, or at least you say less volatile. That happens when you recognize that there could be rainy time. And this is the rainy time. And this is why I appreciate the effort by Hsiao Leung and Kai Lun and colleagues in pushing for this. I hope that you will see more things happening. If Sabah and Sarawak Premier and Sabah Chief Minister, whoever the next person would be after the election, if they are not organizing a summit of Premier and Chief Minister, I hope our Chief Minister, Chow Kuan Yew, would do that. But for this thing to happen, just like in any nice idea, it wouldn't happen until politicians see benefits. Because to try something new is always risky, right? You invite criticism all the time. So in other words, what I want to say is that the future is determined by you, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, you are a very small percentage of the entire Penang population, but in many ways, in your own circle, you have that influence. If people here actually have that idea and say this has to be changed, whether you're Malaysians or you are expats or MNC management, you have that influence. So what we need is actually for us to move towards an IGC 2.0. Ultimately, you can only call it IGC 2.0 if that's come from the federal. But before we get the 1 to agree, you need to get the 2 and the 11 to agree. That's make things easier because if I'm Prime Minister, I'm not going to cause trouble by inviting everyone, having 13 warlords come here and say, what do you want? No, I'm not going to do that. I'll try to make everyone believe that you know, this is a good idea, but there's nothing much we can do. Reform cannot happen too fast. Otherwise, we lose everything. Any prime minister would say the same thing. But if people want something new, and you're bold, you're vocal, it would happen. Think about Undi 18. I mean, I know people who think that it's a bad idea, but just look at it, how it worked, right? When that idea gained enough legitimacy, no politician dared to openly say no. Whatever they complain behind, they would just openly say, yes, we agree, this is a great move for democracy. It's the same thing. Decentralization can only happen when the idea gained legitimacy. And again, legitimacy not like because everyone out there agree. Most people don't even know what decentralization is, very naturally. You guys are odd ones. Normal people are not like me or you. They don't talk about politics. They talk about everything else, right? It's odd people like us that can make the world change. So I think it's about future.
Okay, thank you. You're right in that. Of course, we can't look too much and get stuck in the past because what we do see is how complicated and complex the whole historical growth has been. So it's about looking forward or more looking at now and what we can do. Now, one thing about the word decentralization, you mentioned it, it connotes something being done from the top. The top decentralizes. So I think what we are trying to do in Penang is that we have waited long enough. So the decentralization has to start maybe from the middle. Or not bottom up, middle, I think. So these people are not bottom. They're in the middle. So Penang can lead in the sense of getting a conversation going, a national conversation, like you say, where we involve other states, also the middle of other states, as it were. It could, and then sort of force the hand of the center so that they can initiate the IGC, as you talk about. That's how I would see the process for us to move forward. YB Gooi, anything you want to add?
No, I was quite taken by what Wong was saying about how we need to form the intergovernmental committee, IGC 2.0. Just to add on, I believe that for us to see real decentralization, there has to be interstate cooperation. And really, in many other countries, they have very established councils that deal with this sort of things. But in Malaysia, if we talk about intergovernmental or state federal councils, there are a few, but they are totally not working. They are basically more of a ceremonial thing than an actual working committee. I mean, we do have, for example, the National Finance Council, and they are supposed to meet regularly to discuss about federal state issues, problems, policies affecting the states. But really, nothing ever gets done in these meetings, as I understand it. Totally ceremonial. In fact, I've heard from a researcher recently that whenever they have such meetings between the Prime Minister and the Chief Ministers or Menteri Besars, and I have to clarify, this was during the time of Barisan Nasional, not under the current government. They would have a meeting and they would discuss things officially. And then after the meeting, there will be a separate meeting. And then a separate meeting will be by the Prime Minister and BN, Barisan Nasional, Menteri Besars, and Chief Ministers. And that is where the real stuff gets done, you see. And really, none of the meetings are disclosed publicly. There are no minutes. So there are all these things really need to be looked at. We have the National Finance Council, the National Council on Local Government, as well as a National Council on Land Matters. So until we can have an interstate, organization like this, a committee where all the stakeholders can get together, I think that is where our voice will become stronger. And I of course, couldn't agree more with Wong that there also has to be public buy-in. And your support is so important. If there is no interest from the public on why we should get greater autonomy or funding, then I don't think we can get very far. One last point I'd just like to add is that when we talk at historical perspective or context. Malaysian politics have always been centered around race conflict, religion conflict. But we never hear about competition of state powers, state rights, state interests, who can do better. And in my sort of imagination, wouldn't it be better if you really, when we talk more and we fight more on state rights, as Penangites or as Kedahans or as Kelantanis, right? Without having to put a label on our race. And I think that would be a better direction to move in the future.
As a proud former Perak-ian, about now Kuala Lumpur city's resident, I welcome the challenge from Penang.
Yeah, we tend to want to shut each other up, right? That's true. Okay, we've got 15, 20 minutes, just enough time, I think. There's a very eager hand that went up. I'll have to give the floor to you first.
Empowering Penang, greater decentralization. Is it possible? Let me give 2 examples. Perak, Penang, Kedah. We're the same region. We're talking about water. The 3 states can't even agree on water security for 3 states. That's how many years? We had the span, but what did the span do? Every state is looking after their own interests.
But that was
water security. Water security is a national security issue. It is not state. But it is not possible to actually get the regions to actually cooperate. We had a chance. We had NCR, North Corridor Economic Region. We had the other corridors as well. What happened to their corridors? We even had NCIA, an authority. What happened to them? Officers out. Okay, now we're talking about federal and as well as state. Talking about transport. National transport policy. Do we have a national transport policy for both land, sea, and air in place now? No. The issue is, back in 2013 and 14, there was Prime Minister's office commissioned a few people to go and do.
May I interrupt here? Is there a question coming?
Yes, what I'm trying to point out is that what you are saying about empowering Penang and a greater decentralization is not going to work. We are thinking within the box.
Okay, show us outside the box.
No,
perhaps.
I'm just trying to show you that within the box, it is not going to work. Greater decentralization. All right, now I brought about water security. We need a central government to look at water resources within not just Peninsular Malaysia, but also the East Malaysian, Sabah and Sarawak, and come up with a national water security policy. The same with transport.
I think we get the point. We need to know who you are, I think. You haven't introduced yourself. We don't know who's speaking.
I'm a retired engineer. Born, bred, and working here all my life. Okay?
We get your point. That
no, let me continue, okay? Let me continue as regards transport.
But don't give your own lecture, please.
No, I'm not giving a lecture. I'm just pointing out. The issue here is whether we are able to do empowering Penang, decentralization.
And you're saying no.
I'm saying is that we are still thinking within the box.
Okay, so
which is not going to work.
Okay, so we get your point.
Back in 2013, the Prime Minister's office commissioned a lot of these international consultants to do air, water, air, marine, land transport system. But what happened to all the studies? It didn't even really surface, let alone being discussed by all the states. It doesn't work unless, of course, we are able to think outside the box and have a federal government and also all the states looking at the country as a whole, not as individual states. Like, for example, in China, Yangtze River, the southern area, is always flood prone. But on the northern area, it is dry. And they are able to actually, lift the water from the south all the way thousands of miles across a few provinces over to the barren north and make the land fertile. That is what we need to think about, not decentralization.
More centralization, you mean? But anyway, I think it's sort of off the point. I don't know what you guys think. Next question, please. Yeah, sir.
Thank you. Very good afternoon. My name is Zulfikar. I'm from Penang. So the item today is case for greater decentralization. So we acknowledge that there is decentralization. Penang is asking for more. Yeah. So normally when you ask for more, there must be appraisal. Do you deserve it? Yeah. So I want to explain about this. I want to see Penang because this is brought about by the present government. So it's now 17 years. For me, it's quite long already. Yeah. I want to look at two areas. One is development, one is policy. When I look at development, one of the first big project the state has been selling to the people is the PTMP, Penang Transport Master Plan. And I still remember to today, the very key sentence, Penang people don't have to pay a single cent when it was launched. Yeah. Today, after 10 years, that failed. Somehow the state could not get anybody to invest in it. Yeah. That today, every single cent is paid by the people. So I'll come to the question. That is one on the development. Second, you see, this, I'm looking at items which are purely under state control. You don't really have to depend on the federal because you're talking about decentralization. Let's look at areas where state have full control, very little need for federal. So the PTMP, to me, it has failed. Yeah? Second is the Bukit Kokos Highway. This is a pure state project. Yeah, state project, fully under state control. Today, there are supposed to be 3 segments. Only 1 segment is completed. So again, to me, the state has failed. This is on the development. There are many more, but maybe others have questions. Let's look at policies now. So Penang go for this tagline, CAT, Penang leads, inspire the nation. So let's see the leads, local council. Back in 2013, I believe it was more for election. Penang State challenged the federal, went to the court. There must be a local collection. But anybody, who can read will know you will fail because the law is there. And true enough, basically every level of the court, the state just reached the corridor and they will say, go. Until the federal, it failed. So I wonder how much was spent. But fine, you say you are the hero for local election. Come today, when you have full control of parliament, I recall the first session, this KT minister said, local election is no more priority. Okay, fine, maybe for him. But where is Penang state government? Why were you quiet? 2013, you went all the way to show Penang people. State election, local election is very important. Okay, fine, you can say the law doesn't allow. But, Prof, you remember? We said there's a way, mock election. At least do something. Do something, but nothing. Show the people, do a mock election. Okay, from here, at least some of the seat for local council, you get this. It was not done. Then what else we see? Local plan. Penang is the state where is 100% considered developed. We have 2 council. Both council are the highest level, city council. But 17 years and no local plan. It's such a bad thing actually. Definitely. So what happened here? Then we talk about minimum 30% women participation. Also fail. I mean, you might say, okay, in the election is the people elect. But the local council, they are appointed. The state government can easily appoint 8 out of 24. 17 years and not done. This is on policies, yeah? Then we talk about CMI, Chief Minister Incorporated, a body, which is what I term as a one-man show, accounts no show. 17 years. And they talk about CAT, competent, accountable, transparent. It's just not there, 17 years. And how many of you are aware that the state budget, annual budget, is not available online? You cannot download. Even the local draft plan, when it was released, that's not online. But Penang State talk about digital plan, this and that, When you want to see the local plan, you go during office hour, you see there, maybe you can take pictures, that's it. There's nothing online. So please, before you talk about greater decentralization, I, as a pure Penangite, I'm very worried. When we give you more power, more money, it's not going to work. Not going to work for the people, but maybe for the government, yes. So please elaborate on this. Thank you.
Want to say anything about?
I am not an exco. I qualify first. Nor am I representing the state government. But I think, no, but I mean, of course, I'll try my best to answer some of your questions. I know, okay, well, I mean, anyway, I am an elected rep and I will try to answer your questions. So on I think you started off with development, isn't it? And you were talking about the Penang Master Transportation Plan. And really, I mean, that was another reason, actually, if you remember, why the government came out with this plan and using this mechanism of private partnership, PPP project, to build where we have reclamation by the private developers, and after that there'll be exchange of land to the state government so that it can fund the public transportation plan for Penang, right? This problem has been going on, I mean, even before the master plan came out, before Barisan's time also, this is been a long-standing issue on how to solve traffic problems in Penang. I think you're slightly older than me, you will remember more than me, right? So when Harapan took over, they had this problem. How are we going to find the money to build the necessary roads that are required to ease congestion, etc.? So they came up with the idea that the only way, because Penang had no money, Penang has no money that sufficient to build these kinds of projects. And it's not just Penang. Most states, as I was saying earlier, because of the system, we cannot generate sufficient funds to carry out these projects. And that is why we had to use PPP, and under the Penang, now it's called the Penang PSI, Penang South Island Project. And if you remember, another problem, although I just want to relate, where we're talking about federal state, right? If you are not having good relations with the federal, often the federal will punish the state and take away development funds. Do you remember after Sheraton move, what happened?
I remember before
Wait,
that.
yeah. I'm talking about this issue. Let me just finish. I just want to give an example, right? Before, Pakatan Harapan had already agreed to support and fund and back a loan to be taken by the government, state government, to build the LRT system. After Sheraton moved and the new PN government came in, what did they do? They revoked the guarantee given by the federal government. The loan was to be taken by ASEAN Development Bank. So when we talk about decentralization, I'm not saying that we don't have problems or that we shouldn't be doing more, as what you have mentioned. There are areas that we should be concentrating on. But we are talking about right now, there are certain fundamental structural problems that must be addressed. Right now, The federal government collects 90% of the taxes in the whole country and gives back less than 10% to the states. In Australia and India and all these places, federal government gives back at least 40% back to the states. And why do they give this amount? The money is given so that the states can carry out these projects and this development that are required in those states.
Penang started development 200 years ago, since colonial time. Why you say Tapak Rawa got resource? We used to have resource.
What
We
resource?
have a lot of buildings, a lot of schools were already ready, roads were ready.
No, I'm talking about money.
People,
People we have. People we are fantastic. That's why I said, there's no reason why we cannot be like Singapore today or Hong Kong today. But the biggest problem is money. Right? Where do we get the money to build more schools, to build the kind of universities or the whatever that we want to do? Sorry, I mean, yeah.
So I think may I have the man behind? He's been waiting a long time.
Because I think it's a. So, do you mind, sir? I go ahead. Let me respond to the first two person because I think there's a very interesting conversation here, and of course I shouldn't be surprised. This is Penang, right? You have very sophisticated people. Okay, the debate what we have here is not about centralization or decentralization. You want to go one step deeper. When I talk about decentralization, I say that let the states compete and get all these things. The broader paradigm that I draw on is one of self-interest, that you don't need people to be sane. The mechanism is a competition that somehow find a solution. It's very much a market economy. I know some people don't like that idea. It's this thing like the bakers don't care about your welfare, but because they want to make your money, they bake you cakes and bread. The other idea that when we think about centralization and then we think that that might work is grounded in another larger paradigm, largely, on two assumptions. That you would have leaders who are very smart, who would make all the right decision. And second, they have their heart at the right place. So they wouldn't sell you out, wouldn't eat you up. That's the two things that we have. The first gentleman mentioned about China as an example and say, you see, you have a great government that can actually think about the whole country as one, and they can pull resources from one place to another. The framework we are talking about here, and I'm not saying that only what I think is right, but I'm saying that the other thing we are looking at here is to not count on the good luck of having omnipotent and selfless leaders. The whole idea of democracy is one of failable mortals. We don't count on saints and sages. We count on selfish people like us. Somehow, you got an incentive, right? Bad guys do the right thing. Not because they're good, but because that's what demanded of them, right? So I want to frame that here. Because the first respondent answer was that his main discontent was that, say, what we actually need is not more greater decentralization, but perhaps is greater centralization provided you have the right government. So the whole question here, how lucky you are. I always think that democracy is a messy business, it's a waste of time. If I'm lucky enough, I would always go for authoritarianism. But I'm that kind of unlucky guy that I wouldn't even win gambling, all those card games during Chinese New Year. So I never expect myself to be lucky. As someone who has so little faith in my own luck, I go for democracy. That's my solution. I know some people are much more luckier than I am. That's perfectly fine. Now, for the second question, your point, sir, is that if the government is not performing, we shouldn't talk about decentralization. Now, I'm not a Penangite. I was formerly an employee of the state government. There's, of course, conflict of interest, but I'm not defending them. Because ultimately, I believe that if governments are not good, kick them out. That's the whole point of having democracy. The point here is that with centralization, are we saying that the central government, the federal government, is much more competent, much more trustworthy? That's a question you have to ask yourself. But from my perspective, I think if we decentralize the power, we basically open up more sites of decision making. More people will make decisions. Some would always make some stupid decision. It's perfectly possible for democracy to vote in the wrong leader and punish yourself. Just look at America now, right? That's the whole point. It's your right to make mistakes. So my point here is that the fact that Penang state government has not been as good as we want, does it really take away the case for having decentralization? Are we having the good luck of having a fantastic national government? One thing I know that was for all the years before 2008, we never got free transportation. But today you have it in Selangor and Penang. This is a terrible government. But I think as terrible as they are, they still do some good things. Thank you.
Thank you. The two gentlemen here have been wanting to speak a long time.
Allow me to ask my questions first, and then you can come back to your. My question is directed to Prof. Wong. You mentioned earlier that when Malaysia was formed in '63, the Federation of Malaya dissolves. There's no Malaya at all. I believe I was following. I'm a senior. I've been following the formation of Malaysia, and all the referendum and so on in Sabah Sarawak and so on, and the impression is given, rightly or wrongly, was that the formation of Malaysia was a formation of 4 different regions, Singapore included at that time. Yes, but then Brunei opted out, Sabah, Sarawak, and Malaya. 4 different regions to form a confederation of Malaysia. So that was the impression in all the referendum. And I think the Sabah, Sarawak, they had a referendum also. They opted to come in on that basis. And that is why they have the MA 63 or MA and so on. Malaya, we don't have that MA and so on. When you mentioned that Malaya was dissolved, and that was news to me. It was news to me. We are not aware of that. I still had a belief that it was that region to form Malaysia. Now, so that I think would be the reason why Sabah and Sarawak, if you ask them, they always detest the idea that the Malayan Peninsula Malaysia people always say 13 states, 13 states. They keep on saying we are not 13 states. We are a different region. We can't form it. We are not one of your 13 states. So don't treat us like 13 states. So we have our rights, see? And that's I think one of the reasons why they are pushing very hard. They say they are the region that are pushing very hard, and if they can't get it, may, like you say, constitutionally, they are doing it, passing it. Okay, right now, Sarawak, they have their own education, their private universities, and so on. Sabah likely to follow suit and so on. So I think that is the thing. Now, the people at top in the federal side in Malaysia, I think some may still think that it's just one of the states, so now my question is this, all right, given the mindset, the Sabah Sarawak, they think they are a region, and then there may be people in power at the federal region, they still think, yeah, you are one of the states, so we should apportion you as one of the states. So with this kind of mindset, so you would feel that Sabah Sarawak would say, no, we are going to push forward. We are also, of course, they come short of saying that if we don't get it, we'll succeed and so on. They're not talking about that. Okay, given that, do you think that because of the mindset, would this mindset impact the decentralization of the various states in Peninsular Malaya?
Yeah. Okay. I see it. Yeah.
Stuart MacDonald, Think City, also formerly Penang Institute. I think the concept of decentralization, there's a lot in it. I think it could help if we start to unpack it. Because today we've been talking about two major things. Fiscal redistribution, which is about more cash coming, and then devolution of power. And I think that they're two separate things, but they're intimately connected. A path forward has to be based in realism, where we are today. How do we move forward? So in terms of fiscal redistribution, how do we present tax reform as a win-win situation? How do we build into tax reforms elements of ring fencing, performance monitoring, outcomes-based reporting, so that as a win-win tax, if we can spend increased tax income on economic development, we grow the economy, we grow our taxes. As we grow our taxes, we keep a share of that growth. So there you keep the redistributive model of the federation. Rich states support poorer states. You also incentivize performance, a possible way forward. And then in terms of devolution of power, well, let's be realistic. Penang is not going to take over the health system or the education system, but there are parts of that system that we could take over. So in terms of education, think about technical education. You know, I think Selangor have got MOU with Department of Education to do that. In the health system, could we carve out elements like preventative health, community well-being, the things that make sense to be done locally? But can we demonstrate that we have the competencies, that we have the capacity and the skills to deliver? Because we're going to need funding to build the capacity. So it's a bit of a circular question, isn't it? But I think if we can just start to unpack decentralization, because there's a lot in that as a concept.
Any comments to that? Yeah.
He was raising his hand. No. Yeah, he raised his hand.
Thank you. My name is Julian Peach. I'm originally British, settled here on the advice of my grandfather a long time ago. We haven't mentioned much about law. And a month ago, I was working in Nigeria, and they have changed the distribution of VAT there. And how it happened was one state took the federation to court, saying it's not in the constitution that you keep all the VAT, and I'm going to argue it through the courts. That led to other states saying, oh, this is interesting. And now they've changed it. It took 3 years. So is law also an effective way to get change? The IGC 2.0 sounds like a lot of discussion, which may not be successful.
Was there one more here, sir? Yeah, that will have to be the last question.
Danny Goon.
Oh,
yeah?
Danny.
Yeah.
Prof. One more.
Just,
yeah. Yes, ma'am.
You see, this question of greater decentralization to me has always been something like the Holy Grail. It's something you want to look for. You spend a lot of time energy, even hot air, but you probably never get it because decentralization is a moving goalpost. It's a moving target. But then having said that, there's nothing wrong with trying to get something as status. So I'm very interested in what Professor Wong said about this movement of the states to get together through your bipartisan committee, which YB Gooi talked about, to maybe get a platform going. Because if you look at it, there are only two parties to a decentralization discussion, the federal government and the states. From the federal government's viewpoint, why should they even talk about this? They got more esoteric items on their plate. And also we know politics here is all about politics of patronage. If you give away powers, there goes your lolly. So I don't think they're ever going to think about it. So the question is, how do you set about putting up a platform for the various states to come together to do the needful? Because we are always reminded now, and again, I was very much taken aback by what you said about there be no longer the Federation of Malaya. I always thought Sabah and Sarawak claims, even today, and we are all on the same Malaysian first group, we are all in the same group. So I read the same thing as you read, you see. They always claim, it's a tripartite thing. Sabah, Sarawak, and the Federation. We are not one of 13. But what you tell us today, which is new to me, but I'm sure it's a fact, is that they are just 2 of 13. But they have already done the groundwork. They have got approximately maybe 10, 20, 30% what they want, and they will get more because of their power at the parliamentary level. So, gentlemen, what is the motivation for Sabah and Sarawak to work for the other 11 states to set about a platform to go towards decentralization? That's my question. Thank you.
One last question I'll allow the lady at the back.
Yeah, I'm a Penangite, and I have great interest of what's going to happen to Penang, and I'm worried. Okay, whatever the dilemma was in 1948 with the British, the Sultanate, and UMNO, and all the bickering that has been going on for 60 years. Okay, impossible is not me. That's what I always said. What can we do for the now? Let's go on what we can do for the betterment of Penang for the now. And if Penang is going to set an example, I am for it.
Thank you. Okay, last comments, yeah.
Definitely, I think time is a bit short now. With regards to the questions that were raised or points by Stuart, when we talk about decentralization, it's really a very huge topic. It is on every aspect of government, and it can go from education to economy, everything. It's everything: health, infrastructure, roads, etc. So, as far as our select committee is concerned, in the near term, what we would like to do is we want to focus on perhaps one or two issues that we feel perhaps in the short run that we want to concentrate on. One of them would be, of course, fiscal decentralization. Maybe we will be looking at transport, and the other one, social welfare. These are areas that perhaps in the beginning that we may want to look at. However, you are also right to say that, look, I mean, it cannot just be about asking for more money, but there has to be something corresponding with your responsibility, right? So I think these are things that definitely we want to also look into. I'm trying to think of an example but the issue right now really is that there is this fiscal imbalance, a huge area of imbalance. So we want to start a process in which we want to look at how we can address these problems, right? So I mean, it's not like today we talk about it, tomorrow we have a solution kind of thing. And that's why we need Think City and Penang Institute to sit down and think about what kind of policies moving forward that we can specifically look at. yeah, and we want to do a symposium, interstate symposium soon, next year, probably next year, in which we want to get the different states to come together. And as Wong has said, it would be really good if we can get all the heads of state to come down. Perhaps we can organize a summit in Penang, and we can talk about what are the things that are most relevant and needed for each of the states, and then come to some sort of a common understanding or platform then to be able to then take it to the next level and ask the federal government, right? So definitely a lot to unpack there. On the question of the law, I think the gentleman was talking about, it has always been argued that if we want to see greater decentralization, we need to see how we can reform our constitutional provisions. Because you see, maybe I'm not clear about the position in Nigeria, was it? But in Malaysia, under the constitution, we don't have clear, for example, provisions that say that the federal government must give so much money to ensure that there is a just way of calculating. We have no institutionalized formula. Yes, like I said just now, we have capitation grant and we have road maintenance grant, but we have no formula beyond that into dealing with fiscal equalization. For example, like in Canada, they have. In fact, it's incorporated into their constitution, section 36, right? I still remember that, whereby it is specifically stated that the federal government has a responsibility to ensure funds are given to the provinces so that they may be able to provide public services at a particular standard. So we don't have things like that. And these are things that we want to look at and look at the reforms so that perhaps, we can bring about better and greater autonomy. What was it? The last point I leave to you there. Is it? No. What was it? The lady. No, sorry. Oh, yeah. The gentleman on, you were talking about the Holy Grail, right? Asking for decentralization is like chasing the Holy Grail. I agree with you. It's not something easy to achieve, right? But then, political struggles, reforms, and you want to see change in society is never easy. I mean, how long did it take for us to have a change at the federal government level? 50 years. So I think the start is you have to have an idea. And then you have to think whether or not in the current state of the system that we have now, is it fair? Does it need to be further reformed? And if it should, then we have to find a way lah. But no shortcut. As Wong said, if we can, we come together, we discuss, and we galvanize and we campaign. So I mean, again, no matter, I don't have a answer, right? But I think we have to move towards that direction, because what we are saying right now, Penang, the system is not fair, or rather, it needs to be reformed, and it applies to all states. And if all states can get together, perhaps then we will have a better chance of convincing the federal government to take on these reforms. Thank you. Lady one, sorry. What was the question? I think you said, if anything about UMNO, is it? Something about UMNO? Huh?
The dilemma of 1948 with the British. Yeah. Let me try to memorize what I wrote down. There was a dilemma in 1948, according to Professor Wong, am I not right? With the British, with the Sultanate and UMNO. Okay.
Oh, okay.
That 1948. Didn't you mention that?
Yeah.
Okay. Correct me if I go wrong in my facts.
Yeah.
Right. So with that dilemma, right, and 60 years of all this bickering, has been going on with whatever party was there bickering, right? What I'm trying to say is, let's look at the now, the past history. If we keep on going back, take the best out of the past and come to the now, and let's go forward. I am born here, but I spent 40 years abroad. I see what others have fought for. The people, it's people's power. Here in Malaysia, we don't have people's power. It's even worse for the okay? At least some people are protected here by whatever institution. So let's go and do something. As I mentioned, impossible is not me. But if we have the whole people going together, we will get somewhere.
Maybe you answer this.
Question really.
Okay,
I mean,
right.
Yeah, thank you. Well,
Okay, then I want to, okay, before I come back to the first and the fourth questions, go back a little bit on the law part. We actually have Sabahan taking up, and even Sarakan government, they taking the legal approach on challenging the definitions of continental shelf, on the 40% income that's supposed to give back to Sabah. Those are areas where you have ambiguity that you may possibly challenge, but I think that's probably those are the issue. And in case if they want it, there might be a trouble for the federal government because they have owed them all the monies all the way back, right? But this is where it probably would drag on a little bit, and in that sense, political solution might be important. Now I want to go back to the part. I was a bit surprised that it come across new to people that Malaya was dissolved on Malaysia Day. But it is common, it's understandable because this has been the political myth propagated by both sides. At the time in negotiating for formations of Malaysia, I think Tengku, Lee Kuan Yew, they all emphasized that this is going to be 4 equal partners. And this is why Sabah Sarawak hang on to that. Now, to put that in perspective is very simple. You have to think about, on one end, the talk that we are 4 equal partners is assuming that we are a confederation. You have 4 units remain so. Or, alternatively, that Malaya still exists, and therefore everyone else is represented by federal government. But we are not the UK. In the UK, England does not have its own government. So the national government represents England. Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, you want anything, you talk to the national government. And that's why there was these questions that the English voters were shortchanged because Scottish MPs can decide on their welfare, but not vice versa. In Malaysia, no, we have this. So on one end is this myth that we are a confederation. And I say it is partly because all those proponents of Malaysia at that time sold this idea in such mythical way. On the other end is what you have seen as represented by the 1976 amendment to Article 1, Clause 2. Now you wonder what it is. It's basically say Malaysia consists of all this territory. So in 1963, we have it as, say, the Malayan state, the Borneo state, and Singapore. After 65, Singapore part was repealed. So you're left with these two. 1976, the amendment was to push everything together, so you end up having 13 states. So that's as if like we are a symmetric federation. That's one end. Confederation is another end. How do you solve it? The solution what I propose here is to formally recognize we are an asymmetric federation. You give that recognitions in Article 1, Clause 2, so that you say Sabah Sarawak are special regions. You have to assure them. You can't talk about all these changes in a patronizing tone. That's important. But having said that, I also always defend that doesn't mean that because you have been shortchanged in the past, today you can turn around and say, whatever I want, you would have to give me. No. We have the voting right. So that come back to your question. Why would Sabah and Sarawak give up on that? Because they are not getting very far, as much as they wanted. Why? You have 83% of the voters from here. They control 75% of the MP. Any real changes involving constitutional amendment, you need 2/3. You can't get through. And the federal government just give them lip service because that's what would anyone do in that position. Unless you present them a different picture, right? So they can continue on, but they can also think about how to get what they want more effectively. The way is not for them, that means Sabah and Sarawak, not for them to concede. It's what I told Hsiao Leung. It's for them to lead. I know you have been victimized, but today is the time for you to show us the leadership. We have the way, but we have no leadership. So if you're bold enough, this is my call, and I hope that the media would put it in. Abang Jo, as the Sarawak first premier, lead Sabah and the 11 Malayan states. Now, if Abang Jo is not doing that, then Hajiji, or if not him, his successor after the state elections, do that. If neither of them, then my call is to our Chief Minister, Chow Kwang Yu, start with a summit. Penang leads. Because ultimately, the only way we can do is for the 2 and the 11 to join force. Otherwise, anyone at 1 wouldn't want to invite trouble. As someone said just now, they have many more things to consider. But if we don't solve this problem, we will not be able to solve other problems. Including, I know many people in Penang feel very strongly against land reclamation. I'm not an economist, but I can roughly see how this was actually caused by federalism, our centralized federalism. You have a state here that is so poor that basically they do not have enough land to extract resources from. They don't have forests to cut down. What do? They basically give that concession to any private company and let you reclaim the land. You make the profit. In return, you build this route for me, you build that for me. I don't have to pay anything. I show to the voters, you see, I deliver. So we are actually, you're looking at it, our environment is a victim of centralized federalism. But that solution has to be one that is very thorough, not one that say, who can blackmail the federal government, and then you get what you want, because you probably end up in a very bad deal. So I'm not at all to say any decentralization is good. Decentralization, unplanned decentralization can be disastrous. But the political situation has made it almost impossible for the status quo to be retained as it is. So instead of letting chaos run the show, we should actually be very honest, recognizing every party's interest, and sit down and talk. And so I want to end this and say, let's give Hsiao Leung, Kai Lun, and their committee the greatest support that we can give. Let Penang lead.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I think we have to come to an end. Join me in thanking our speakers. It's the beginning of a discussion. We hope it leads into a national discussion, sub-national discussion, or whatever. But I think in the end, like Stuart pointed out, it is a rather big subject. And although it looks like one subject, you quickly get mixed up into all sorts of discussions. But I think the main point we want to discuss is that, and we would agree that what we are trying to do is that we want to improve the efficiency of governance in Malaysia at the local level, at the state level, and so on and so forth. And one way we think we could be an effective way is actually what we have been talking about today. Formulated as empowering Penang, but of course it's empowering Penang to lead, to empower Malaysia. So, thank you.